What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to FudgeMuppet. I am Scott, here with Michael and Drew as always. And today, this Elder Scrolls podcast, we are talking about Calpers. Many people ask about them. There's a very obscure sort of term up there with like Kim and Amaranth and all kinds of stuff. And I will forewarn you, this whole conversation is going to be like 90% conjecture. There are very few mentions of Calpers in the game anyways, which we'll go through, and then we'll sort of extrapolate and see what kind of things we can think of and talk about. But I thought it might be interesting first, before I pass it off to you guys, is to talk about what a Kalpa is in our real world mythologies, I guess, although religion or tradition, I guess, because it's still ongoing. In Hindu and Buddhist traditions, a Kalpa is basically this immense period of time that's specifically 4,320 million human years, and that's a single cycle of the cosmos, or a day of Brahma, which is like the big deity. We're not going to go into Sanskrit stuff and all this kind of stuff, right? We're not going into real world mythology, but the essence there is, to sort of take away, is a Kalpa is just a really, really long time as part of a cycle. So that's what its real world word is. Now we've got its mention in the Elder Scrolls. Do any of you guys want to...
Well, if I had to boil it down to make it as simple as possible for the beginning, if you imagine, you got the Dawn era, followed by the Malefic era, followed by recorded time, first, second, third, however long it goes. The way to imagine it is imagine that the Dawn era is the end of the previous cycle and the beginning of the new one somehow simultaneously. So it is a beginning and an end.
And to clarify there, that's not even the most canon interpretation. It's basically Michael Kirkbride said that. He says, assume the Dawn era was the end of the previous Kalpa. The new Kalpa begins with the first day of the Malefic era. Then put on your lore hats and start looking hard at the ramifications of that. And that's what we're doing here today. So
yeah, look, this is going to be a really whack podcast.
For me, it's
you just got to go with the flow today.
Yeah, like if you imagine the Ouroboros, or Satakal as the Yakudans will call it, the snake eating itself. The way I see the Dawn era is where the tail meets the head. It's kind of like the end and the beginning. But yeah, like as you said, Malefic is day one of the new Kalpa, but there's a lot of mishmash of ideas going on in the Dawn times that seems like things are coming to a close, but things are also starting up again.
Well, we can briefly just touch on, just to get everyone on a level playing field, we'll start just touching on the ideas or concepts that are in lore, strictly canon.
Okay. All right. Well, let's begin with Skyrim, because that's the most recent Elder Scrolls game. It's the game that most people will be the most familiar with, and you literally hear about a Kalpa in the main storyline. So it's super
Would you like
relevant.
me to get the quote there?
So I've got it. I've got it. So it's from Paarthurnax, and it's when you talk about needing to stop Alduin, and you say, I like this world, I don't want it to end. Paarthurnax says, I'll skip the dragon language. as good a reason as any. There are many who feel as you do, although not all. Some would say that all things must end so that the next can come to pass. Perhaps this world is simply the egg of the next Kalpa. Would you stop the next world from being born?
And that's the whole idea behind, like, obviously you're going to sort of fight Alduin, who was the World Eater, who was supposed to bring the end to the Kalpic cycle. So by defeating him, you're prolonging the existence of this current cycle.
You really wanted me to say Pruzar. Lane Vokin.
Which,
you remember that?
in a way, Alduin did it himself as well, by kind of getting greedy and deciding he wanted to dominate the world rather than bring it to an end. He has delayed it. So everything that happened after the Dragon War is a delayed end to a Kalpa, really.
And that's sort of implying, I guess, like if you were to go off that the Dragon War only sort of happens like maybe 500-ish years kind of time, or sometime in between that and the start of the First Era. So that kind of roughly makes it like 2,000 years. So that's not a very long... I mean, or it could be. I don't know. Like maybe that is a long Kalpa compared to previous ones. We have zero idea. But yeah, so the idea there is that it was sort of prolonged further than it should have been. So that's the Nordic view of things. There is also, like you were sort of mentioning with the Yakut stuff, there is the idea of Cyclical, which is both Anu and Padme essentially combined into one being, a giant snake eating itself. And another sort of like just little tidbit to bear in mind there is that when Cyclical is eating itself, there are these spirits, that appear, and there are certain spirits that discovered a way, well, Ruptga specifically in their mythology, or also called Tall Papa, discovered the walkabout, which is essentially their way of moving between the Kalpic cycles without dying. So when Cyclical eats itself and sheds its new skin, those particular spirits can survive those cycles and go on into the next one.
I like the phrase when it talks about Ruptga created a helper out of the dead skin of past worlds. The helper is Sep, who later creates the world of mortals. So that's like their version of Lorcan, basically. And Sep is driven crazy by the hunger of Cyclical and convinces some of the gods to help him make an easier alternative to the walkabout.
Yeah.
So this, of course, is the world as we know it, and the spirits who followed Sep become trapped here to live out their lives as mortals.
And to throw another thing in there, the sort of idea of building things from like past worlds or stuff is also in some of the other mythologies. The idea that like Set was created from past worlds or so on. But
well, it's important to say here is like, most people know this, but you really need to pay attention to the fact that Anu and Padme, or Cyclical, or whatever any race calls it, they're on another level to the divines and the Aedra, the Daedra and whatnot, because these spirits are almost adapting to the cycle themselves. So when you imagine Ruptga, he develops a way of striding between world skins to kind of endure when the cycle ends. So even these spirits are dealing with that, and this is a slight theory that might not really be true, but I quite like the sound of it, is that you can kind of get elements of this walkabout you can see it in the lore with the elves. So the elves have a longer lifespan because Firenaster discovered a way to extend life by shortening his stride. And I kind of relate this in a way to the walkabout in that they can stride between world skins. So like by shortening the stride, he's made the elven lifespan so much longer.
Yeah. That's a cool theory. No, I like that. It's sort of like a very like low-powered version of what those gods are doing. Yeah, no, definitely interesting. Just to quickly just throw out the other thing there's the Atakota, the whole big great root thing with the serpent eating or whatever it is in the Argonian mythology. Whatever those lizard men believe, just whatever.
Yeah, the children of the root story. It's as much as I like the Argonian lore and I also like the gist of the story, it is a very long story. And it gets a little bit kind of abstract and cloudy at times.
And it's very similar to the Yakuden Satak Akel combination. Is very similar to the idea of Atak, the Great Root, and Kota, the Serpent, kind of combining.
Yeah, absolutely. The final like explicit mention of this Kalpa is in the Songs of Pelennor, and it's about Umril the Unfeathered and his divine father, who is supposed to be from another world river, basically. And once again, that's carrying on this idea of things that come from the previous world can kind of leak into the new world. You know what I mean? And you imagine that through some sort of Dawn era. I find this the easiest way to think about Kalpa, because we've talked about the easiest way to envision it is an Ouroboros. And like you said, when the mouth meets the tail or whatever, you've got the Dawn era. Right? There are ideas, and I've mentioned them before on the podcast, about how the world is changing from mythic to mundane. It's becoming, as you get further away from creation, everything's sort of setting in and feeling less mundane. There's this idea of like a parabolic Kalpa, or there's very other words. It's not.
You can think of it like an elastic band. I think is the easiest way in the sense that there's like a spring back effect. So you're going around the loop from mythic to mundane, and then launching back to mythic again.
Yeah. So like so when creation first starts, everything's super divine, super mythic. There's gods everywhere. All of this crazy stuff's happening throughout the Merethic era, like all of the origin stories of a bunch of the races. Boethia eating Trinamac and pooing him out.
and it gets more and less and less divine, but you can see the transitory stages in between if you try and look for them. For example, like we talked about on the Riemann podcast, the idea that there's Riemann born from, the hill, the legendary hillock scene, and born with the amulet of kings on his head, and we have tales of Pellinal, and there's all this like more I'd say the cooler stuff back in the day. And the more you go down the line, the more mundane it gets. Although there's also this idea that it's starting to get more mythic, with the Oblivion Crisis and Martin transforming, and then, Alduin's come back to eat the world.
So when you imagine it as that circle, so it's like you're kind of coming across, and at the top there's the Dawn era, comes across, going through Dawn, Merethic era. It's like, it's all still pretty mythic. Now you're kind of getting to the first era, it's coming down, getting less mythic, second era, and now you're sort of doing this third, fourth era kind of thing. Like if you imagine it as a perfect sphere, you imagine it like going around in perfect time. But the idea is that it kind of like you were saying with the elastic band, slingshots back, because all of a sudden the world needs to end. They want to end it. So there's all of those, like the Mehrunes, the Oblivion Crisis, and the Alduin, the World Eater, and also the Dagoth and all of these things. It's kind of like there's a lot more mythical things happening now, and you're getting closer to those days of divine and stuff. But you don't know whereabouts we are.
Yeah, it does get tricky as well, because I feel like you can find really mythical things happening all the time.
Well,
there's not like a massive break where there's like nothing mythical or cool happening.
Well,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, because you've got the plane meld in the second era, which is very similar to the Oblivion Crisis.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if we go back to what we said about the idea that the world should have ended when Alduin was supposed to consume the world, it's almost like as time goes on, there's been continuing cataclysmic events that keep getting foiled, but one of them needs to happen so that the cycle can renew.
Well, here's an idea. What if you kind of came down and the bottom of it is actually when Alduin was meant to eat the world originally? So that's a lot of mythic stuff. It's still, you would consider those times all mythical too, but compared to before them, no.
Yeah.
And since then it's actually just been a flat line. And then it's waiting to come
the
around.
circle's just getting bigger and bigger almost.
Well, kind of, because that's the thing. It's all relative. I was saying like mythic is relative. Like, what's mythical to someone in the fourth era is not mythical to someone in the first era, because, they're watching Nords shout down whole walls and stuff. But also we know that, like you were saying, it can be extended, by delaying the World Eater or whatever apocalypse you're looking at. And then also you do throw in, there's the Dragon Breaks, which is like that timeline. It sort of breaks for a bit and then stitches itself back up and then keeps going. And there's been a few of them. So look, all of these models, highly theoretical and highly conceptual.
Subject to criticism. If it's all fair play to say, nah, I don't like that, or I do like this.
Yeah. But I think some of the most interesting implications of Calpers in general is what it means for the future, like what's happening, like going towards that Dawn era and stuff, but also taking from the previous one. So with this idea that, like with Umariel having a divine father from a previous world river. And also, here's another little like take for you. It is in the...
Is this the Khajiit?
No, this was actually this is actually in the Annuad, the annotated Annuad. Sorry. So on the world of Nirn, all was chaos. The only survivors of the 12 worlds of creation were the Elnafey and the Hist. And as we know, the Elnafey ancestors of Mer and Men and histories of Argonia and so on. But so there's this idea that there are these 12 worlds that were created, but another way to sort of think about, and then the remains of all of them were made into one. But another way to think about that, instead of sort of some sort of like geographical idea, there's Nirn plus 11 other worlds or whatever. 12 worlds that made one Nirn. You could think about that in less of a geographical, planetary sort of sense, and more about a Calpic cycle way. It's like the 12 worlds of creation. They're the previous Calpers, if you get what I mean.
Yeah.
So, and also like Kalpa, like spherical kind of thing. So, maybe that's some way to think about it. So then on top of that, we can sort of talk about the idea that perhaps Elnathay and Hist, being in the Dawn era and the survivors, explicitly called the only survivors of the 12 worlds of creation, it could be that they were from previous Calpers in general, but because the Hist don't have the same derivatives or degeneration, I guess, as the Elnathay did, like they split into the old and wandering, and then the races of men and mer, whereas the Hist have sort of stayed, like they've just carved out their little bit of black marsh, and maybe that's where people get the ideas of like that's why they're from a previous Calper or something like that. If you know, that's all interpretation though as well.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of black marsh, may as well bring up the idea that the ancient Argonians were from a previous Calper as well. Like this idea that the Zanmirs weren't built by them. I have to say
it's really funny because it gets into that like ancient aliens kind of vibe stuff. You know that?
Yeah,
meme
like who built the pyramids? Couldn't have been us.
Yeah,
must have been aliens.
Yeah, aliens from a previous universe.
So with the direction we've been going with this, is like you imagine we talk about it a lot, that the Elnathay wars between the old Elnathay and the wandering Elnathay is is the early battle that kind of set in motion the rest of time. But if we look at it through this Calpic lens, it's almost as if this Elnathay war is a climax. It's the end of a story as opposed to the beginning of one. Because if the Dawn is the end of the previous Calper, it's like it's been built up to the wandering and old Elnathay battling each other.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what. I don't know too many movies or songs that start with the epic battle.
Well, we just don't remember.
Climax with the
we don't
battle.
remember the build up to it. We just see the after effect. See it happen and then the after effects.
Yeah, for sure. I will say as well, one other canon mention that it's not canon that it's Calpers, but this is an in-game mention that may be referencing Calpers, is from the Elder Scrolls Online, from like Khajiit dialogue. And there's this spirit, Nalado, that says, Nalado should not be here. This one should be prowling the sand behind the stars and preparing for the next pounce, not lingering in this fetid tomb. And next pounce being capitalized as well. It could be something else, but you could extrapolate from that the next pounce is a Khajiit phrase for like the next cycle, the next world.
This is also all kind of tying into, like, even what Drew was just saying, that he should be awaiting something in this sort of in this place, and the sands behind the stars is sort of their afterlife, right? And the same as the Yakutans have their far shore, or the Nords have Sovngarde. So there are ideas around that these are essentially like Sovngarde, for example. This is mainly in regards to Sovngarde, that Sovngarde is like a place for shore to gather all of these great warriors and stuff in his halls. So when the next Dawn era comes, he's got the best warriors to fight in this next battle.
And to support that idea, it says explicitly in the monomyth that the far shores is a place for spirits to await the next world skin. So it seems like, with the pounce and this idea about Sovngarde, is that normally the way we perceive an afterlife is that's the end. It's your eternity of rest. Everything is over now. You just chill. But there's several mentions.
It's actually the gulag.
There's several mentions. You got to fight your way back in. I don't think they get the same weapons, but and they're awaiting something. They're all standing around throwing rocks at the two people. And then they're all going to parachute back down to Nirn afterwards.
But it does sort of create a little bit more of a reason for the gods to want to have souls given to them and ferried to them. If you think about, like, the Hist want their, the Argonian souls to return, and Sovngarde wants to be filled with warriors, and Far Shores, yada yada. So having mortals to want to go back to their afterlife is a very good idea, because then you're encouraging recruitments for your armies. I know that's such an extrapolation of it all, but there is this idea that they're waiting for the next thing.
How would that work with Daedra? I guess we could talk a bit about which entities exist outside of Kalpa cycles and which don't. Is it just that Anu and Padme exist outside and everything else exists within?
Well, I think it's kind of fair to say that Anu and Padme would be outside, just in the way that they are these cosmic forces. The way I, at least, so you have the Orbis, which is, you know, Anu, Padme, and then you have the Aetherius Oblivion stuff kind of created, but then obviously the idea for Mundus starts, and then they build a Mundus. But the idea is, I envision the Mundus as the Ouroboros that goes over and starts again, because that's
kind of like Lorcan's trick, right?
And that's how they're trapped in this sort of thing. And then you get into this weird stuff with like the insane dragon like Akka and the shards of song. But the idea that it's crazy because it does this thing over and over and over again, but it's like kind of, maybe that was set by Lorcan, because it's kind of even not really explicit. Well, nothing really is explicit about these, but how the Kalpa even started, because all of the names, all of like Lorcan, Lorcage, you know, Shaw, Shazar, all of these names are conceptualized by people living in the, like, this Kalpa and the cultures that exist here. Like, there's no necessary reason for, say, like Elnefey or men and Mer to be in previous Kalpas. For example, there are ideas that you can interpret the Mythic Dawn commentaries and their tales about Lig and stuff, and these Dreg kings that own it. They are from a previous Kalpa, and back then Molag Bal in that incarnation was their chieftain and so on, and obviously is different in the new incarnation. But do you know what I mean? Like, maybe there were just Dreg and other people around, but no men and Mer necessarily.
Well, and the idea that Oblivion and the Void is kind of separate from this Ouroboros, this Kalpic cycle, makes sense with the fact there's no passage of time in these places.
The time works differently for them. Like, yeah, so that they have all of their different cycles. Because interestingly, like, this is just the tiniest little nod, but like, you know, the Grey March is another example of a cycle, and there are other cycles, but they're kind of independently working their own way, because they not bound by Akatosh's time. If it's useful to just envision Akatosh as time for this purpose, you know, it's kind of, it seems to exist outside.
Well, and the Daedra, you know, they mimic creation, so in a way they can mimic the Kalpic cycle in their curse that they put on Jigalag and Sheogorath.
Which really means the Daedric princes, if they mimic creation, could really change a lot between cycles too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Depending on the incarnation of each cycle, the Daedra changing based on what they see and what they kind of get inspired by, you could have all kinds of different representations over time.
To throw another quick thing there about, I mentioned it, you know, that we have in the Mythic Dawn commentaries, you have the Dreg Tyrant Kings of Lig, and that is referred to as the domain of the upstart who vanishes, and that's referring to Lorcan. But it's interesting that, like, Lig is referred to as the domain of Lorcan, whereas, you know, you would sort of, the Mythic Dawn ideas is sort of that Lorcan is the, you know, as a Daedric prince of his own realm of Mundus, but that is his domain, his creation kind of thing. So Lig has been referred to by Michael Kirkbride on a Reddit AMA as an adjacent place. And if you think of adjacent place, if you think of the Calpers, like, you can think of it rather than being such a geographical place, although that's a valid interpretation, it could be that it's the same place in a different cycle in a different time, you know what I mean? And that's how it's adjacent. Like, if you lined up all of the spheres, all of the wheels against one another, it's in the same spot. But this, I can just feel this getting so wacky. Like, I hope it's all.
I think we've already established it's Halo, right? You're just all on the big ring.
If you aren't watching this on YouTube and you're listening by audio, it's probably going to be a little bit extra confusing because you aren't seeing us wave hand signs everywhere and trying to, like, you know, to sort it out. But yeah, so there's another example of how maybe it could be. But yeah, so that like, if you envisioned Molag Bal Mehrunes Dagon being created in a previous Kalpa. Like, here's some crazy stuff. There was even the idea that
Here's some crazy stuff, he says. Oh, good. We're about to get into crazy
Yeah,
stuff.
so I just want to find exactly where he says, but he basically where he brought down Lig by destroying the towers or something. I can't find. I'm just trying to find. Yeah, so hold on. Here we go.
It destroyed the
Change
towers of Kimel Garjig.
Yes, in this big rebellion. But maybe like you could maybe envision this as like him tearing down the towers, tearing down the wheel, the reality in that time or whatever, and then it starts again. Like he was actually the instigator of the New Dawn era or something like that. And if you think about it, revolution is very intertwined with his sphere. So if you think about him as a vehicle of revolution, like that fits the Kelpic cycle.
Yeah, it's also interesting that towers were involved there, and then there's also, as we know, the Thalmor Tower theory of the current setup, and that potentially high members of the Thalmor want to undo creation, essentially breaking the Calpers, I assume, so that they can go back and, be immortal spirits and not be bound to this endless cycle of mortality.
I believe one of the phrases was like unbind the dragon. So if you envision instead of a dragon more of a serpent, like the Ouroboros.
Was that phrase canon?
No, I think this was it was I think it was a Kirkbride thing. But if you break open, if you pull its tail from its mouth and it's open, well then the cycles can't go on anymore and it's broken and you're all back to sort of the original Orbis place.
What if that just made it the cycle ends and then that's it?
Well, yeah.
It just made it linear instead of cyclical.
But I think, to be honest, I feel like there is a fairly good grounds for believing in sort of the idea of Calpic cycles and stuff. And I even think the Dawn era being the start is pretty... and the end of start and end of the last Calper is a pretty good thing, because there are so many like very meta elements of the Elder Scrolls that concern itself with escaping the cycle, like Lorkhan's trick and Mundus and so on. So
yeah, and to me, I think it's just so canon by what Paarthurnax says. When he talks about next worlds.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm sure he doesn't just mean the next world being a barren wasteland after Alduin breathes fire all over this one. It very much sounds like, Alduin's going to end this cycle. Yeah. And a new one will begin.
And if you think about Shor or Lorkhan's intentions, creating a big army for the next cycle, because I imagine he kind of wants to win every single cycle, because the more the elves are, or that kind of entity is pushed on their back foot, like pro-Aedra entity is pushed on their back foot, well, not Aedra, but pro-elven god kind of things, the more they can reinforce the idea of mortality and keep the sort of cycles going, and keeping mortality going. They don't want it to break down. And then obviously we can start talking a little bit about the ideas of Kim. So like here's just another example of the Kalpa to envision it as an Ouroboros, but the idea of the wheel. When Vivek achieves Kim and sees the wheel, he sees it on its side and it says I, but he can realize that it's a wheel, it's a cycle, and that's like what a wheel does. So it's just another sort of nod to it. But you can kind of touch on this ideas of this stuff called becoming the new Amaranth. You achieve Kim and then you try and become the new Amaranth, which is super kind of out of canon stuff, really. But it's like trying to like become essentially the new godhead,
right?
Yeah, the new godhead, and trying to like get out of this entire dream. But that's even bigger than Calpic cycles. But
what's the thing? It's like the eye he sees when looking at the Calpic cycle from the side. It's just looking at the wheel from the side. But you almost imagine it like the destruction of the towers is like pulling the spokes out of the wheel, if you look at the wheel the same way you look at the Ouroboros, and that's what allows the wheel to just like, become a line. It just like breaks off and is no longer a complete circle. But that's, because I think we kind of already said this, but that's how Dagon kind of freed that world from creation, because it didn't get to restart, so it was freed from creation, in tearing it apart.
It's a funny, here's a little funny take on the seeing the wheel on its side. And I mentioned this in the Greatest Fictional Universe video, but some people interpret that as like Vivek realizing he's an NPC and the wheel is the CD-ROM, and he sees it on its side in the disk drive. Like that's a really meta take, but it's kind of like funny and almost like it's kind of legit, It's like Well,
Not
well,
legit.
not anymore. No, but like a legitimate interpretation that's like it's a very meta one, like because
Yeah.
a
So
lot
So
of
you're saying Vivek is free in the real world now, somewhere.
Well, yeah,
He's going to visit you
all
in the
around
night.
us.
He got out of the video game.
Anyone who is listening to this, you are now cursed to be visited by Vivek in the night.
Yeah.
I wonder how that theory will hold up when CDs
Well,
don't really
that's the
exist.
thing. No one plays Morrowind on a CD drive anymore, so it's like only a. But yes, obviously, it's just funny. It's got that interpretation because I was trying to make the point in the video that you can have like a real meta connected real world interpretation, or it can be interpreted solely within the realm of Elder Scrolls mythology as well. So it doesn't have to be.
It's funny because when you achieve Kim and you see it on the side and it says I, it's more like saying I exist, right?
Mm.
But
Yeah.
it's also the other take is like I'm an NPC. I'm not the player character.
Yeah, because it's
And when Vivek achieved Kim, so you'd say in the past tense that he came, right?
came.
Yeah, he came. That's
I don't know where you're
what's
going.
the past tense of kimmed?
Oh, very funny.
That's a really weird take, man.
Very, very.
Look, it's a
good,
mind-blowing
Drew.
experience, and he's free.
Tip of the hat to you, sir.
when the Kim is so good that you just like leave the mortal realm. Right?
And you realize everything's just a CD drive.
Yeah. So here we go. Off the top of your head, can you guys think of anything very tangible that could be from a previous world? So, for example, we know Urmaril's father was from a previous Kalpa, according to the Songs of Pelennor, which themselves are a mythological song, but so is everything in the Elder Scrolls, pretty much, to be honest.
Well, they say the dregs. There's this idea that the dregs are from a previous Kalpa when they were the rulers of Tamriel.
So Urmaril the Unfeathered, you could go dregs, you could even throw in Hist and say, and if you go with the idea that the 12 worlds of creation are previous Calpers, it's kind of the Elnafey in general, but, not sure exactly. And, if you go with the idea that the dregs and everything in the Mythic Dawn commentaries is strictly in another Kalpa, then you can have Molag Bal, and because it's interesting, isn't Hermaeus Mora, Drew, you probably know the quote potentially about him being made from
the leftover ideas of creation.
Yes, so that's an interesting one as well. Like if you could interpret that as like, well, this is actually a bit different. If you can sort of when they were like the Kalpic cycles, I just overall it makes a little more sense when it's kind of like. The leftover, if you envision a new creation each time, when the Dawn Era occurs and there's new stuff, but obviously what they're working with kind of is the old stuff of the previous Kalpa, so he's like the leftover ideas of that.
It's just upgrading the game engine.
Yeah.
That's
Dude, yeah. There are heaps of. So that's another example. That's a really like a meta.
Oh, that came from my head. I don't know if someone said that before.
People actually do say that. Like there are
right.
like people people can expand the Kalpa to all kind of stuff. So for example, people use it to headcanon everything they want. So if you were to envision, how each Elder Scrolls entry has a different like feel or look and stuff like that and sort of direction. So if you can imagine like there's the Morrowind Kalpa, Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind, and then in that, so because similar events happen or something, but then like sort of Tamriel rebuilt mod projects and stuff, you could envision that as all of that's what Tamriel looks like in this Kalpa, and then the other Kalpa you get your Oblivion one, or it's people use it to try and like decanonize Elder Scrolls Online. They're like, oh, it's in another Kalpa. Like, just pack it away and throw it over here.
Sounds like Calpers have gone too far.
But I feel like if
like
that were the
Copers.
case, though, and the Calpers were restarting, you'd think some of the bugs would get fixed. Some of the problems that persist since Morrowind.
But maybe bugs are actually just like, the leftover ideas like carried over or something, like
They're just glitches in the matrix.
So they really are
Yeah.
features.
Yeah, they really are. It's like part of the lore. The bugs are actually like errors of where the Kalpic cycle is sort of like, it's like picking up parts of the previous stuff and bugging out or something, It's crazy, man. I could feel we're getting close to the point where it's going to start degenerating really quickly.
Yeah, I feel like we're getting into the Joe Rogan podcast. And
But like so
getting a bit silly.
So ultimately, as we know, Calpers are basically just these cycles, and if you want to imagine it, it's Dawn Era, and then it goes around, and then Dawn Era is also both the ending of the previous KALPA and the beginning of the new one. And then there's different explanations as to you getting, when you're on the circle, on the other side of the circle, you're like sort of further away from the mythic and the divine, and then you rejoin with it in the apocalypse, and then also the creation of the next world. But yeah, you guys can go through the video again and listen through, but but yeah. So Calpers, one of the crazy things. It's not that hard to understand the concept. It's the implications that are crazier. If you just go, oh, Calpers, it's a cycle of the universe. Yeah. It's pretty straightforward and easy. Think of it like an Ouroboros. Easy.
Just think of reincarnation on a wheel.
Yeah. And Cyclical's probably the easiest mythology to view it through. So if you want to look more into it, Yakutan mythology and create theories, Yakutan mythology is a good place for it. There's a bunch of Nordic stuff. They're the two main ones I'd look at if you're trying to build more theories and stuff. But
maybe someone can get a theory out of the Cyclical followers who roll in 100-mile stretches across the desert sidewinder fashion.
Well, hold on there. Maybe that is like sort of a walkabout reference or something for them, like some kind of smaller way.
Changing their stride, eh?
Yeah, something like that.
All right, well, thanks everyone for watching. We kind of knew this would be a wackier, less straightforward episode, but I hope you all enjoyed it, and we'd love to hear what you think in the comments section below. It's been Michael, Scott, and Drew from FudgeMuppet, and we look forward to nerding out with you again very soon.